Denise braved the relentless cold in the early hours after Christmas, determined to keep her small diner open. But when the mysterious motorcyclist walked in and called her by the name only her mother used, she felt her heart freeze. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The icy wind cut across Denise's face as she approached Denise's diner in the early hours of December 26th. The street was nearly deserted, and the few cars that passed seemed to glide over a layer of snow that had been accumulating day after day. Along the edges of the sidewalk, mounds of white snow reached high enough to cover part of the old sign displaying the diner's name. Denise shook her head sadly at the sight of the Christmas lights still adorning the door, even though hardly anyone had walked through it in recent days. Still, she refused to close the diner. She had to keep it running, even if it meant serving just one customer per night. Unlocking the door and hearing the bell chime for the first time that day, she suppressed a shiver. The cold was not just outside. An enduring sense of anguish clung to her inside as well. The pile of bills on the counter was a constant reminder that keeping the diner open was more than an act of stubbornness. It was a matter of survival. Denise ran her hand over the surface of the counter, remembering how, in better times, it had been filled with people laughing, eating, and sharing stories during the holiday season. Now, even the cheerful Christmas music that used to play seemed incapable of bringing life to the space. She sighed and turned on the interior lights, hoping the warm glow might create a sense of comfort for anyone who happened to come in. It wasn't long before two local customers, bundled in worn coats, entered with cautious steps. The sound of snow crunching outside preceded the soft chime of the door. Denise greeted them and offered menus, knowing full well they were there more to warm up with a coffee than to spend much money. They responded with grumbles and sat at the farthest table. She couldn't help but notice their slightly wary glances in her direction. For a while now, Denise had felt the judgment from some of the townspeople, and it wasn't just about the diner's struggles. It was about her, being a black woman running one of the town's few local restaurants, a place many deemed too traditional for someone like her to manage. She tried not to dwell on it. She had to keep it alive, no matter the cost. As she wiped the counter with a damp cloth, the doorbell chimed again. Denise looked up to see a tall man in a leather jacket, snow-covered boots, and a reserved expression scanning every corner of the diner. His steps were firm yet unhurried, exuding neither urgency nor hesitation. Denise managed a small smile. "Good evening." Or, well, "Good morning," she greeted, uncertain how to address someone at this hour. He nodded slightly. His disheveled hair, likely tousled by the wind outside, gave him a rugged appearance. He didn't respond immediately, instead walking up to the counter and sitting on one of the metal stools. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, slightly disconcerted by his silence. He cleared his throat before replying, "Apple pie if you have it, and just a plain coffee." Denise was pleased to finally serve something beyond hot drinks. She headed to the kitchen, turned on the oven to reheat the apple pie she had prepared earlier, and returned to the counter to make the coffee. Meanwhile, she noticed the man observing her, not with hostility but with quiet curiosity. She found herself equally intrigued. He seemed comfortable in his silence, offering no explanations for why he was in town or what brought him out on such a cold night. Perhaps he was just passing through, a traveler not keen on small talk. Either way, she felt it best not to push. She would stick to her role as hostess. When the pie arrived, he seemed content. He ate quietly, sipping the coffee in slow, deliberate gulps. Denise busied herself arranging cups on the counter, stealing occasional glances. The two local customers exchanged looks and muttered about outsiders, making it clear they didn't like seeing anyone unfamiliar in their usual space. Yet, they kept to themselves. After finishing his pie, the stranger stood up to leave, placing money on the counter. When Denise checked, she was shocked. The amount far exceeded the cost of the pie and coffee. She turned to call after him. "Sir, I think you've made a mistake." He stopped at the door, cast one last glance at her, and said nothing. Instead, he nodded in acknowledgement before stepping out, leaving a trail of footprints in the snow. Denise stared at the money in her hands, astonished. It was more than enough to cover the bill, with plenty left over. It was the largest tip she'd received in a long time and a much-needed boost to the till on a night when hardly anyone showed up. She approached the two regulars to offer them a coffee refill, hoping they might stay a bit longer. Any extra sale, no matter how small, made a difference. One of them eyed the door skeptically. "I don't get why you take money from strangers, Denise. Who knows where it comes from?" he remarked with a sarcastic tone. "I need to keep this place going," she replied, striving to stay calm. "I like to think that anyone who walks through that door comes in peace. That one's trouble. I've heard rumors. Lone biker types are never good news." Denise chose not to engage. She was tired of gossip and prejudice. Ever since she took over the diner, she had endured snide remarks not only about herself, but also about any customer who didn't fit the local standard. It was tough, but she often recalled her mother's words. Kindness and a good cup of coffee could break through many barriers. Sadly, the regulars didn't seem inclined to spend more. They finished their coffee and left, leaving her alone with the faint strains of instrumental music playing on the old radio. Denise collected the cups with a sigh of disappointment and returned to the register to count the night's earnings. A pang of anxiety struck as she saw the stack of bills awaiting payment: heating, electricity, and overdue rent. The tip left by the biker was a lifeline, but it was far from solving everything. For a moment she paused, leaning against the counter, thinking about all the harsh comments she had endured since taking over the diner. "A diner needs someone more experienced," some had said. "This isn't the place for you," others had whispered. Many still turned up their noses at the sight of her welcoming the few travelers who braved the snow-covered roads. Yet, she wouldn't give up. A faint sense of pride made her lift her head. If she gave up now, everything she had fought for would have been in vain. Outside, the snow had thickened, forming a white, silent blanket over the street. The old sign of Denise's diner barely welcomed anyone anymore, as the snow piled higher and higher. On impulse, Denise decided to offer fresh coffee on the house to the last two customers who might show up. But when she opened the door, she saw no one. The cold wind blew in, carrying a handful of snow that she quickly swept away with her shoe. The street was empty. The clock read past 2 in the morning, and it seemed no one else would come. She tried to distract herself by taking stock of supplies for the next day. In the middle of this task, a loud bang from the kitchen startled her. Grabbing a damp cloth, she walked back to investigate and saw it was just the back door slamming from the force of the wind. She quickly shut it and returned to the front, tossing the cloth back over her shoulder. Her heart had raced for a moment, but it gradually calmed as she reminded herself she was alone with her thoughts. By 4 in the morning, she decided to close up for good. As she locked the register, she realized the biker's tip had saved the night. Without it, she wouldn't have even covered the heating costs. That extra amount made her believe in some higher providence. Perhaps there was a reason for his unexpected visit. Perhaps in some way his silence had brought something extraordinary. Sighing, Denise donned her gloves and grabbed her coat. She needed rest, but she couldn't shake the image of the leather-jacketed man. The way he had looked at her, steady but without hostility, lingered in her mind. Why so discreet? And why leave such a large tip? She didn't know. She only imagined that somehow there might be more to come. As she turned off the lights, a glimpse of snow falling outside caught her attention. The flakes danced under the glow of a street lamp, creating an almost magical post-holiday atmosphere. There were no celebrations, yet she felt a shiver of hope. It had been a long time since she felt this glimmer of optimism, since she noticed the customers dwindling and the criticisms weighing her down. But something about that night had stirred her. She thought of the bills, the town's judgments, the empty diner. Despite everything, she had survived another icy night. For better or worse, she was there to face the next day. With a final glance at the chairs turned upside down on the tables, she switched off the radio and ran her hand over the door, testing the lock. Everything was in order, silent, almost still. The snow kept falling, soft and slow, blanketing the street and hinting at a white dawn. Though tired, Denise felt her heart beat a little faster as she remembered the enigmatic visitor who had, in such a short time, left a lasting impression. In that moment, a thought crossed her mind. Perhaps he brings something I can't even imagine yet. And this simple idea made her smile. She zipped up her coat, touched the door handle, and made sure all the lights were off. She needed sleep, but doubted she could relax with so many questions swirling in her mind. As she turned the key in the lock, a shiver ran through her, a mix of expectation and apprehension. It had been another typical winter night at her little diner, yet it felt like the beginning of something new, something that might change everything forever. Denise locks the door as snow falls silently, unable to stop thinking about the enigmatic biker who might somehow alter the course of her life. Daybreak was just beginning as Denise returned to Denise's diner, still feeling the biting cold that lingered outside. The snow had piled relentlessly on the doorsteps through the night, and the semi-deserted streets preserved the stillness of an isolated town. With every step, she replayed memories of the mysterious motorcyclist who had been there just hours before. She thought about his reserved smile, the generous tip, and the enigmatic air surrounding him. As she opened the doors, she noticed the internal heating system struggling to chase away the chill seeping through the cracks of the old windows. Denise sighed deeply, grabbing a damp cloth to wipe down the tables before the first customers of the day arrived. However, the sound of the bell above the door rang almost immediately, revealing 2 early patrons walking in slowly, as though still half asleep. "Good morning," Denise greeted, her tone warm and welcoming. They responded with slight nods, choosing a corner seat. She noticed them whispering to each other, occasionally glancing toward the counter. At first, she dismissed it as mere curiosity, but their furrowed brows and murmured words made her certain they were discussing the events of the previous night. Well, news travels fast around here, she thought. She served them coffee and brought over warm toast. One of them looked at her hesitantly. "Are you okay? Stayed open late last night, didn't you?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I'm fine. Like I said, I try to keep the diner running as much as I can," she replied, shrugging off the comment, unwilling to fuel gossip. "Gotta pay the bills." The man nodded, but seemed to have something else on his mind. The woman next to him nudged his arm as if cautioning him against pressing further. Their silent exchange thickened the air, but Denise focused on cleaning the counter, determined to provide her best service. The morning passed uneventfully for the most part. At one point, a small group of neighbors came by for coffee but didn't stay long. They ordered muffins to go, mentioning errands to run before the snow worsened. Still, Denise felt a palpable tension in the air. Whispers and vague mentions of a motorcyclist or outsider kept surfacing. It seemed everyone knew a rumor she hadn't fully grasped yet. As she mulled over the previous night, the bell jingled again, and in walked a tall woman wearing a heavy coat, her sharp eyes scanning the room with a serious expression. Her hair was tied back in a ponytail, and she pulled off her gloves as she entered, brushing off the excess snow before clenching them in her hand. Denise immediately sensed she wasn't an ordinary customer. The woman's gaze settled on her, and she walked directly over. "Good morning. You're Denise, right?" she asked in a friendly yet cautious tone. "That's me. Can I help you?" Denise offered her a welcoming smile. "I'm Beth Turner. I need to speak with you privately, if that's possible." The woman's directness and demeanor piqued Denise's curiosity. She didn't seem like someone looking for a job or a city official. Perhaps a journalist or a local with a personal interest in the diner. Either way, Denise could tell this was important. "Of course. We can sit over by the counter if you'd like." She gestured to a quieter spot. As they moved to the side of the diner, Denise noticed a few heads turning their way. Clearly, Beth wasn't a complete stranger. Something about her presence exuded determination, but it also unsettled Denise. She poured Beth a freshly brewed coffee. "Thanks," Beth said, taking a sip and exhaling. "I've been looking for my brother-in-law, Ethan Turner. I heard he might have passed through here." The mention of Ethan Turner immediately brought to mind the silent motorcyclist. This confirmed that he was likely tied to something larger than a simple midnight stop. While Denise couldn't gauge the depth of Beth's connection to Ethan, she suspected there was a complicated story behind it. "He showed up last night, had coffee, ate apple pie, and then left shortly after. Left a very generous tip," Denise added, almost mentioning her overdue bills but stopping herself. "Didn't say much, just ordered the pie." "That sounds like Ethan," Beth remarked, adjusting her cup carefully. "He used to ride with my husband, James, before, well, James passed away some time ago. Ethan kept traveling, following old leads they had. Sometimes he forgets that not every place is safe for him." Denise noticed the slight tremor in Beth's voice as she mentioned her late husband. Yet her eyes held a steely resolve, as though she were willing to travel the world to find Ethan. "So he's following leads?" Denise asked, intrigued. "He didn't say where he came from, just got up and left." Beth hesitated, as though weighing how much to share. They had notes, places they planned to visit. "I won't go into details for now, but I know Ethan is trying to complete something James left unfinished." Denise nodded, curious about this project. Before she could ask for more details, the diner door swung open abruptly, and a man in a thick jacket, his cheeks reddened from the cold, stepped in, surveying the room like he was picking a target. Denise recognized the expression instantly. Ray, one of the town's most antagonistic residents, a man who despised outsiders and often caused trouble for businesses that didn't fit his idea of local tradition. He stopped by the counter, glaring at Beth before fixing his gaze on Denise with a smile that held no warmth. "Morning," he said, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Morning, Ray. Your usual?" Denise kept her tone professional, though her stomach twisted. Ray scanned the room, clearly bothered by Beth's presence. "Just a plain coffee, and if it's not too much to ask, make sure it's not tainted with any handouts from strangers, all right?" Beth raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by his comment. Denise took a deep breath, determined to avoid conflict. She had too many bills to risk losing customers over unnecessary disputes. "It's the same coffee I always serve," she replied simply, turning to pour his drink. Ray pulled out a chair and sat, but his eyes remained fixed on Beth as though daring her to react. Finally, he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "So we've got some new faces in town, huh? Heard about this Beth Turner, and that Ethan fellow throwing money around where it's not deserved." The porcelain clinked sharply as Beth placed her cup back onto its saucer with force. She stood, meeting Ray's gaze directly. "And who are you to decide who deserves what?" she asked, calm but firm. Ray rose as well, his expression full of disdain. "I'm someone who's lived here long enough to care about what happens, unlike outsiders who show up to tarnish this town's name." Before the situation could escalate further, Denise quickly stepped in, placing a hand on Beth's arm and guiding her aside with a cautious expression. "It's not worth it, Beth. Please, let's not make a scene." Beth took a deep breath and relented, sitting back down but not breaking eye contact with Ray. He, in turn, stayed standing, downing his coffee like a man staking his claim. Moments later, another customer at a nearby table shook his head in disapproval and left, muttering loud enough to be heard, "This diner just can't stop attracting trouble." The remark hit Denise like a slap. She knew that for many her mere ownership of the diner was already a problem, and adding any controversy made her an even easier target for criticism. She swallowed her frustration, holding her composure. Beth finished her coffee silently, clearly displeased, then stood. "Thank you for the chat, Denise. If you hear anything about Ethan, please let me know." Her serious eyes held a glimmer of empathy. "I'll be back another day to talk more." She walked to the door, and Ray stepped aside to let her pass, but not without delivering one final snide remark. "Go in peace, but don't stir up trouble here. This place has enough problems already." Beth shot him a disdainful look and left, the door slamming behind her. For a moment, Denise thought Ray might linger to press her further, but he simply tossed a few coins onto the table and walked out without a goodbye, satisfied with the disruption he'd caused. Left alone, Denise cleaned Beth's cup and tidied up the empty tables, the tension lingering like a heavy cloud. Whispers, glances, and unspoken accusations weighed on her, as did the mounting questions in her mind. Why was Ethan pursuing leads left by his late brother? How deeply was Beth involved, and how could she help him? Most importantly, how would these rumors further strain her diner's fragile reputation? The day dragged on, with little foot traffic. Denise busied herself with mundane tasks, drying glasses, washing dishes, organizing the stockroom. Occasionally she glanced out the window, hoping to see a sign of Beth or Ethan, but there was only the relentless snow, covering the streets with an almost artificial gleam. As she paused to sip water, she noticed Ray standing across the street, arms crossed, staring at the diner with a hard expression. He looked like a predator lying in wait, dissatisfied and plotting his next move. The sight sent a chill down her spine, a stark reminder of how often she'd been the target of subtle yet intimidating attacks from parts of the community. She swallowed hard and tried to ignore him, though her heartbeat quickened. Returning to the counter, she sorted through paperwork and tucked the morning's tip into a safe spot. She needed the money badly, but the circumstances surrounding it left her uneasy. Beth's words and Ethan's mysterious journey replayed in her mind. Somehow she felt certain there would be more encounters, and that she'd need to brace herself for their consequences. The diner phone suddenly rang, its sharp sound breaking the heavy silence. Denise grabbed it quickly, her voice tense. "Denise's diner, good evening." There was a deep breath on the other end, but no words. She repeated herself louder. "Hello? Who's there?" All she heard was muffled breathing before the line went dead. Frowning, Denise held the receiver for a moment before hanging up, her stomach twisting with unease. The phone rang again, cutting through the silence. Denise answered, her voice shaky. This time, there was only breathing on the line before it abruptly disconnected. Denise still held the disconnected phone in her hand, her heart racing. That strange, silent call seemed to weigh heavily in the air of the diner. The atmosphere was wrapped in a chill that came not only from the snow piled outside, but also from the unease settling deep inside her. She took a few moments to steady her breath and returned to her routine behind the counter, glancing at the antique clock on the wall and wondering if this day would finally end without further surprises. Moments later, the door creaked open, ushering in a blast of icy wind. Turning around, she saw him, Ethan Turner, the mysterious biker. He removed his gloves, stomped the snow off his boots, and adjusted his leather jacket. His expression was the same as before, reserved, almost impenetrable. Denise felt an odd mix of relief and tension. Amidst the suspicions swirling around the town, Ethan's silent figure seemed both a potential threat and the harbinger of something unexpected. "You're back," she remarked, her tone a mix of surprise and statement. He nodded. "Had a few things to take care of, but thought I'd stop by again." Before she could ask what had brought him back, the doorbell jingled again. Beth Turner entered, bundled in a coat against the biting cold. Her face was a blend of worry and determination. She walked straight to Ethan, pulling him aside near the counter to speak in hushed tones. Denise couldn't catch all their words, but fragments about a map, clues, and something involving the late James reached her ears. Her curiosity only deepened as she pretended to busy herself by pouring coffee into 2 cups. A sudden silence fell over the diner not long after. The door opened again, and Ray entered with a companion, a surly man wrapped in heavy winter gear. They took a table near the window, their movements brusque. Denise, always striving for cordiality, grabbed 2 menus and approached them, only to be met with disdainful looks. Though no insults were spoken, the air crackled with the threat of imminent trouble. Back at the counter, Denise noticed Ethan and Beth had grown visibly tense. She approached them, coffee pot in hand as an excuse to linger nearby. "Do you need anything?" she asked, trying to gauge their state. Ethan glanced briefly at Ray and his companion before shaking his head. "No thanks." Beth stepped back slightly, speaking to Ethan in a barely audible voice. "Stay calm. We won't let them stop what James set in motion. Just be careful." Denise, catching that much, frowned, intrigued by the mention of James and some sort of plan. Before she could ask, Ray got up, striding confidently to the center of the diner. He stopped in front of Ethan, his expression hard, fists clenched. "So you're the outsider everyone's been talking about?" His tone was almost mocking. "Seems like you like to come and go without answering to anyone." Beth stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. "He's not doing anything wrong, and it's none of your business." Ray let out a dry laugh. "Oh, it's very much my business because people like him don't belong in this community. And the owner of this diner? Well, she doesn't fit in either." He cast a taunting glance at Denise, who felt her blood boil but kept her composure. The tension thickened. Denise, anxious, set the coffee pot down and moved toward the group, trying to intervene. "Please, let's all stay calm. Whatever this is, it can be resolved with words. No need for a fight." Ray's companion, however, seemed eager to escalate matters. He took a sudden step toward Beth, who stumbled back into a chair, nearly falling. That lit a spark in Ethan, who steadied Beth and glared furiously at the aggressor. He clenched his fists tightly at his sides, clearly restraining himself from retaliating more forcefully. "Enough!" Denise shouted, stepping between Ray and Ethan to act as a barrier. "Leave my diner if you're not here to eat or drink." Ray didn't back down, jabbing a finger into Ethan's chest. "You think you can waltz in here and play the hero with your dirty money and fake generosity? You're not fooling anyone." Ethan, who had been holding back, finally stepped forward. "You don't know me, so don't talk about things you don't understand." "I don't need to know you to see you're going to cause trouble," Ray shot back. The situation erupted when Ray's companion shoved Beth again, prompting Ethan to grab the man's arm in a firm grip. Chairs scraped against the floor, and within seconds, a scuffle broke out. Denise, caught in the chaos, tried to break it up, but was ignored. Ray pushed Ethan back forcefully, causing nearby tables to shake and dishes to crash to the floor. Alarmed customers stood up, shouting for the fight to stop. Beth tried to pull Ethan away, but it was too late. Ray had grabbed him by the jacket, aiming to throw him down. In a swift move, Ethan twisted free, but a chair toppled with a loud crash. Driven by a mix of courage and desperation, Denise stepped between Ray and Ethan once again, blocking Ray's path. "That's enough. You're not going to destroy my diner." Ray hesitated, perhaps surprised by Denise's firm stance. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed 2 people entering the diner. It was the local police, summoned by someone outside who had seen the commotion. Denise felt a momentary wave of relief, but quickly realized the officers weren't exactly eager to take control. Their demeanor suggested they were indifferent, even dismissive. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, arms crossed. "You know we don't want any trouble during the holidays." Ray, sensing there would be no real consequences, stepped back and adjusted his collar. "Just a little misunderstanding. The outsider here got a bit worked up." His companion chuckled as Ethan rubbed his shoulder, visibly irritated. Denise pointed to the overturned chairs and broken glasses, seething. "This isn't a misunderstanding. Look at the mess they caused." The officers exchanged glances, uninterested in taking sides. One merely suggested everyone calm down and go their separate ways. With a smug grin, Ray waved dismissively at Ethan as if mocking his helplessness. "Let's go," he called to his companion. "But don't think this is over." As Ray left, the air remained thick with unspoken threats. The police asked a few perfunctory questions, scribbled something on a notepad, and left without properly assessing the damage. Denise felt a surge of frustration and exhaustion. The sound of shattered glass and dragged chairs echoed in her ears. Beth crouched down to pick up shards while Ethan searched his pockets, clearly looking for something. "Ethan, are you okay?" Denise asked, moving closer. "I'm fine. I just lost something," he replied, scanning the floor, frustration etched on his face. Denise spotted a folded, yellowed piece of paper near the counter. She picked it up carefully and unfolded it. It appeared to be an old map with handwritten notes in the margins. Though some ink had faded, parts were still legible. One name stood out: Mom and Pop's, a diner she remembered from her childhood in another town. Below, a signature read, "James Turner," in elegant script. Her heart raced. She recognized that name. Her mother had often spoken of a young man who arrived during a severe snowstorm and was taken in. The map seemed to confirm it belonged to Ethan, or rather, it had come from his brother. Denise looked up, both confused and intrigued. "Who was your brother? Why is this place marked?" she asked, adrenaline from the confrontation still coursing through her. Ethan lowered his head, hesitating. "It's a long story. I can't explain right now, but my brother James left this behind. I needed to verify some things." Beth, still picking up glass, glanced at Denise with a serious expression but stayed silent. She too seemed to harbor secrets about James. The silence between them lasted only a few seconds but felt heavy with the weight of all the mysteries surrounding the Turner family and the map. Finally, Ethan sighed and began walking toward the door, as if needing to leave before more questions could arise. Denise, still holding the map, wanted to press further, but his expression made it clear it wasn't the time. Glass crunched under his boots as he stopped to glance back at her. "Thank you for standing up for me," he murmured before pushing the door open and disappearing into the icy street. Denise remained frozen, holding the map, as Beth watched her silently. Of all the chaos that had unfolded, the map seemed to be the key to unraveling what was truly at stake. The fact that Mom and Pop's was highlighted brought a flood of childhood memories, of her mother working in a welcoming diner that helped travelers who couldn't afford to pay. How had James, the mysterious brother, connected with such a significant place? Taking a deep breath, she carefully folded the map, uncertain of her next move. A storm of emotions swirled within her: anger at Ray and his gang, frustration at the police's apathy, and above all, curiosity about Ethan and his brother. Denise held the map tightly as Ethan walked away, leaving her with a mix of curiosity and unease in her gaze. Denise stood frozen for a few moments, staring at the empty space where Ethan had stood just moments ago. She still held the map he had dropped during the argument, unsure whether to return it or to dive headfirst into the notes that seemed to hold an intimate story about the Turner family. Beth approached, carefully picking up shards of glass from the floor and casting a concerned glance at Denise's expression. "Did you get a chance to see what's on it?" Beth asked, her voice softened by exhaustion. "Not yet. I only saw the name of a diner my mom used to mention sometimes. Mom and Pop's." Denise extended the paper, thoughtful. "It's strange how it seems connected to something from my childhood, but I can't remember all the details." Beth sat on a stool by the counter, resting her arms on it. "You should take a closer look. Maybe it'll help you understand why Ethan is chasing these clues. After all, this map, it belonged to James, didn't it?" Denise nodded. It was clear that both Beth and Ethan carried wounds and secrets about James, and yet there was a faint air of hope, as if this old piece of paper held a thread of continuity for something that hadn't yet been resolved. She cleared her throat, tucking the map into an empty drawer. "I'll grab the photo album I have in the back. Maybe I'll find some connection." She headed to the small room behind the kitchen, where she kept a few boxes that had belonged to her mother. With trembling hands, she began rummaging through them. brushing off the thin layer of dust that covered old items. Inside were recipe books, a few newspaper clippings, and finally, a faded brown photo album tucked at the bottom of a cardboard box. Denise returned to the counter and sat beside Beth, opening the yellowed pages. Each photograph brought back memories of simpler times. One of her mother smiling as she served bowls of soup during a harsh winter, another showing the old mom and pop's diner, bustling with travelers. At one point, her hands stopped on a picture blurred by time. A young man, bundled in heavy winter clothes, smiled shyly beside a woman, Denise's mother, who appeared to be offering him a steaming plate of food. Notes scrawled in the margin read, "James, traveler in the great snowstorm, fed without charge." "It's him," Denise whispered, her throat tightening. "James Turner. Mom helped him during a big snowstorm years ago. She always said that she and Dad believed in feeding travelers without charging them when they were truly in need." Beth nodded, visibly moved. James used to talk about a diner he found during a wandering trip when he had almost no money. He said it changed his life. That's when he told Ethan he wanted to travel across the country, spreading the same lessons of kindness. Denise closed the album, deep in thought. So that's why Ethan is carrying that map. He must be retracing his brother's steps to honor his memory. And now, in a way, he's ended up here, where my mom worked at the time. Beth exhaled a sigh of relief, as though sharing this had lifted a weight from her chest. When James died, Ethan was devastated. Maybe this journey is his way of coping with the loss, but I worry this town won't make things easy for him, or for you. Indeed, tensions seemed to escalate with each passing day. Proof of this came that same evening. After closing the diner, Denise walked to the grocery store to pick up some last-minute supplies. As she navigated the silent streets, dodging snow piled on the sidewalks, a growing unease tugged at her chest. Her mind couldn't stop racing, especially about Ray and what he might be planning next. On her way back, she noticed something wrong right outside Denise's diner. The sign, which had proudly displayed the name of the establishment in bold letters, was partially destroyed, as if someone had struck it with a heavy object. Pieces of wood and fallen letters littered the snow-covered sidewalk. Denise froze, her heart pounding. She didn't need to think long to suspect who might have done this. Feeling the adrenaline surge, she climbed the steps to the door, checked that it was securely locked, and scanned the area. No witnesses, just the empty street and the cutting wind. The exhaustion turned to sadness as she imagined the work and expense it would take to fix the damage. The fear of being targeted again only made the burden heavier. By the next morning, the news had spread. A few townspeople stopped to gawk at the damage, murmuring quietly among themselves but offering no help. They feared getting involved and facing retaliation. Denise, her heart heavy, swept up the remains of the sign, mourning the loss of another piece of her mother's legacy. Beth arrived, carefully navigating the snowy pavement. "I'm so sorry. I heard what happened." "I don't know what to do anymore," Denise admitted, tossing a broken piece of wood into the trash. "The bills are piling up, customers are fewer every day, and now this." Beth's expression was filled with genuine concern. "Maybe I could help cover some of the costs." "No." Denise cut her off immediately, raising her hands. "Thank you, but I can't accept charity. I need to stay independent. Otherwise, people will say I'm living off others." Beth seemed to understand, though she sighed lightly with worry. "As you wish. But if you change your mind, I'm here." Later, after serving a few cups of coffee and barely any lunch, business was slowing more each day. Denise called the electric company to check on her bills. The news was grim. She had only a few days before the power would be cut off for non-payment. She hung up, unable to hide her despair. What could she do? Sell more? Close temporarily until she had enough money? But closing might mean the end of the tradition she was fighting so hard to preserve. In the midst of her turmoil, the door creaked open. Ethan walked in, avoiding eye contact with Denise as if embarrassed or wary. He glanced at the damaged sign outside the window and then approached the counter. "I'm sorry about what happened," he said quietly but sincerely. "I can try to help fix it. I've got some mechanical skills. Maybe I can patch it up until you can get a new sign." Denise frowned, conflicted. On one hand, she desperately needed help. On the other, she remembered the gossip and how the town viewed Ethan as a troublesome outsider. But her exhaustion won out. "If you've got the time, maybe we can figure out a way to make my diner look less wrecked." He simply nodded and headed outside to assess the damage. Minutes later, he returned with a serious expression. "We'll need new wood, but some pieces can be salvaged if we're careful." The snow continued to fall, making any repairs outside difficult. Even so, Ethan began collecting intact pieces of wood. Denise, unsure how to react, joined him to help. By evening, Beth returned, her car loaded with planks and tools she had managed to borrow from friends. "It's not much," she explained as Ethan unloaded the materials, "but it should be enough to start a temporary fix." Denise felt a warmth in her heart, recognizing Beth's act of kindness. "Thank you, truly. I don't know how I'll repay you for all this." Without wasting time, the three of them started the difficult task of hammering planks into place in the freezing cold. As she hammered, Denise remembered her mother's words from childhood. "Food is love made visible." The thought gave her strength to keep going, even as her fingers froze with each swing of the hammer. She glanced at Ethan, who held a plank steady, and felt a rare sense of calm. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. By nightfall, the diner's facade was still imperfect, but it was less vulnerable to vandalism and the snow threatening the structure. Denise decided to show her gratitude with a simple gesture. She baked a chocolate cake in the diner's small kitchen, letting its sweet aroma fill the air. She called Beth and Ethan to the table. "It's the least I can do to thank you," she said, setting slices of cake on plates. Beth gave a shy smile before taking a bite. "Thank you, Denise. It's delicious." Ethan nodded in agreement, silent but visibly appreciative. For a few moments, they shared a rare reprieve from the chaos surrounding them. Outside, the snow-covered street glowed under the artificial lights. For a brief while, the town's tensions seemed to melt away, replaced by a sense of unity Denise had longed for. Afterward, Beth excused herself to head home. Ethan also left, mentioning he'd stay at a nearby budget hotel. Denise locked the door behind them, turned off some of the lights, and felt a small spark of hope flicker in her heart. Maybe, with the support of good people, the diner could survive. Maybe all wasn't lost. But just as she was heading upstairs to her room, a shout pierced the night, stopping her mid-step. The male voice, dripping with anger, echoed in the cold air. "You'll regret this!" Denise froze, a chill running down her spine. She crept cautiously to the window and peered out into the shadowy street. No one was there, just the endless snow and the dark. Her heart raced as she wondered, filled with uncertainty, just how far Ray was willing to go. The next morning, after the scream that had shaken her the night before, Denise had to muster all her strength to face the new day. The sun had barely risen, and the wind was already howling, scattering the accumulated snow across the nearly deserted streets. Upon arriving at the diner, she felt a pang in her chest at the sight of several newly nailed boards on the facade, partially damaged. Someone had likely tried to pull them off but failed to completely remove them, a clear message that the intimidations were far from over. Despite everything, she decided to open the doors. Staying idle wouldn't help. Once inside, she noticed that the interior retained its warm ambiance, thanks to the heated lamps and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Pushing away the sadness, she turned on the radio at a low volume, hoping to attract at least one or two loyal customers for breakfast. To her surprise, Beth arrived earlier than usual, looking distressed with her phone in hand. Before any greetings, she approached the counter. "Denise, you need to see this," Beth said, opening a video on social media. It was a short clip showing the partially destroyed sign of Denise's diner and excerpts from Beth's post about recent events, vandalism, veiled threats, and prejudice against Denise. In just a few hours, the post had been shared dozens of times with overwhelmingly supportive comments. People from outside the town were expressing solidarity, stating that such behavior could not be tolerated. "Look at all the positive reactions," Beth said, astonished. "There are biker and trucker groups saying they're planning to stop by to show support and bring supplies." Denise felt her heart race. The idea of external help lifted her spirits but also brought concern. Ray wouldn't sit idly by if he noticed the diner gaining attention beyond the local community. She reread some of the comments calling for justice, equality, and respect, running her hands through her hair as she tried to process the situation. "It's comforting to know we're not alone, but I'm afraid this will attract even more attention from those who dislike me," she admitted, biting her lower lip. "Still, I won't back down." Beth smiled, placing the phone on the counter. "If you want, we can record a short video here, thanking everyone for their support. It might be good to show that you're doing okay despite everything." Denise hesitated. She wasn't used to exposing herself this way, but the online support seemed like a lifeline for the diner. She nodded, and the two quickly improvised a video where Denise expressed her gratitude for the encouraging messages, emphasizing the importance of keeping a space open to everyone. Beth posted it, and within minutes, likes began pouring in from various places. It didn't take long for the news to reach opposing ears. Ray and his associates reacted on local networks, accusing Denise of making up stories to gain sympathy and money from outsiders. In angry comments, they suggested that strangers were trying to change the town and that it was all a scam. Denise couldn't read such messages without feeling nauseous, but chose to focus on the positive reactions and deal with the challenges ahead. By early afternoon, Ethan arrived, looking worried after seeing the video about the vandalized facade and reading some hostile comments. He showed Denise messages from biker friends who planned to visit soon to show solidarity. "Maybe it's a good idea to welcome these people," he said, adjusting his leather jacket with a hint of uncertainty. "But we need to be cautious. If they show up in large numbers, it might provoke trouble and Ray won't like it." Denise silently agreed. She remembered what had happened when Ethan first arrived and the confrontation that had nearly turned violent. Still, she felt it was time to take a stand. She couldn't hide forever. As the day drew to a close, the cold weather gave way to another snowfall, leaving the street outside the diner almost empty. Denise and Ethan decided to use the quiet time to make minor repairs in the parking lot. They needed to clear snow and fix the few lights illuminating the area, some of which had burned out amid the recent chaos. Armed with shovels and flashlights, they worked quietly, discussing what they would do if Ray escalated his threats. During their task, the sound of an engine made them turn just in time to see a truck pull up abruptly. 3 men stepped out, bundled up against the cold, their expressions stern and unfriendly. Denise didn't recognize them immediately, but Ethan frowned. They seemed like friends, or at least followers, of Ray, judging by the way they stared. "Can I help you?" Denise asked, trying to sound polite. "The diner's open if you'd like something to eat or drink." One of the men crossed his arms and stepped forward. "We're not here to drink anything. We want to know why you're bringing all these strangers into our town. Isn't it enough that you're tarnishing the place's name with your videos?" Denise's pulse quickened. There was no doubt they had come looking for a confrontation. Beside her, Ethan clenched his fists, struggling to stay calm. A second man, with a deeper voice, nodded toward Ethan. "I hear you've got stories to tell, outsider, but you're not welcome here." Before Ethan could respond, the third man, wearing a thick jacket, gave him a slight shove. It was enough to trigger a scuffle that Denise desperately tried to break up. She stepped between them, pleading for calm, but chaos erupted. Nearby, a few chairs temporarily stored in the parking lot were knocked over. Ethan was pushed against the wall, receiving a blow to his arm that made him groan in pain. Panicking, Denise grabbed her phone and dialed the police, pleading for help. But they would take their time, as always. Moments later, one of the attackers pulled a metallic object from his pocket but hesitated when another car's headlights illuminated the scene. Taking advantage of the distraction, Ethan broke free, and the three men stepped back, reassessing the situation. When Denise shouted at them to leave or face worse consequences, the men exchanged glances, realizing they were outnumbered. They climbed back into the truck and sped off, hurling insults through the window. The smell of exhaust lingered in the air, a bitter reminder of how close things had come to a breaking point. Ethan, panting, rolled up his sleeve to examine his injured arm. Concerned, Denise rushed to his side. "Are you hurt badly?" "I'll be fine. Just need a bandage, maybe. I'm sorry about all this." "It's not your fault," Denise reassured him, trying to stay composed despite her shaken nerves. "But let's go inside. I don't want any more trouble." Inside the kitchen, she prepared warm water to clean his wound. Beth arrived, alarmed by their tense expressions. When Denise recounted what had happened, Beth grabbed her phone to check for any footage. Then she remembered that the diner had an external security camera installed long ago, though Denise rarely checked it. "We might have everything on tape," Beth said, hurrying to the small office in the back. The security camera, positioned at a simple angle, had captured most of the confrontation. Beth copied the footage and quickly edited it for clarity. The video clearly showed the men attacking Ethan and Denise trying to intervene. She decided to share it on social media, using the same hashtag as before, asking for support and recounting the violence and intolerance. The post quickly went viral, sparking outrage and solidarity. Comments flooded in from everywhere, demanding justice and emphasizing the importance of standing by Denise and her diner. At the same time, Denise worried that it would only fuel Ray's anger. Still, she felt compelled to reveal the truth. By the end of the day, while Ethan applied an improvised bandage and Denise reorganized the chairs outside, Beth approached with her phone in hand. "Look at this. There are already hundreds of comments. People from the region and even other parts of the country are saying they'll come to the diner to support you." Denise closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath. Her chest swelled with both hope and fear. "So it's true. I can get help, but I'm also drawing more hostile attention." Beth exchanged a worried glance with Ethan. The tension was palpable, but there was something in their expressions that said, "We're not alone anymore." Denise wiped her hands on a cloth and felt her phone vibrate with an unknown call. She answered, and a male voice said, "Hi, we're a group of truckers. We want to visit your diner, buy food, and show support. Will you have us?" "Of course," she replied, her voice still trembling. "Of course. When are you planning to arrive?" The man explained they'd leave in a few days, bringing supplies, friends, and anyone else willing to join the convoy. Denise thanked him, her heart pounding. As she hung up, she noticed the diner door slightly ajar, with snowflakes dusting the threshold as if nature itself was marking this moment of change. Denise hangs up the phone, her heart racing. On one side, there's support, on the other, threats. Which will come first? Help or Ray's next move? Denise woke up that morning to the persistent sound of the phone ringing beside her bed. Still groggy, she reached over to answer and was met with the voice of a local journalist, already flooding her with questions about the recent events at the diner. Struggling to gather her thoughts, she realized that since Beth had posted the video of the fight, the situation had only gained more traction. She tried to respond vaguely, promising to provide more details later. After hanging up, she noticed her phone was filled with messages, people requesting interviews, invitations to small regional programs, and even strangers asking if they could visit her. A chill of anxiety ran through her. Being thrust into the spotlight so suddenly had never been part of her plans. Deep down, she feared Ray's reaction, knowing he would likely be furious to see the matter gaining so much attention. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself that she needed to head to Denise's diner to open for the day. She dressed quickly, grabbed her coat, checked for any missed calls from Beth or Ethan, and braved the biting cold outside. Snow was falling more heavily than in previous days, blanketing the streets in white and making each step more challenging. When she arrived at the diner, she was surprised to find a small group of onlookers outside, snapping photos and recording videos of the facade. They might have been independent reporters or simply curious locals intrigued by the buzz the diner had been generating online. "Excuse me," she said politely as she made her way through the crowd toward the door. The group parted, and one of them hesitantly asked if the diner was still open. Denise nodded, feeling a bit awkward, and unlocked the door, inviting them inside. She wasn't sure how to handle this kind of attention, but if they were there to buy something, she figured it would be best to greet them with a smile. She set the kettle to boil, prepared coffee, and got everything ready, hoping some of the visitors might order a quick meal or something warm to combat the chill. As usual, she was alone at the start of her shift, not having had time to call Beth or Ethan for assistance. The curious visitors took seats at 2 tables, chatting about the situation that had taken the internet by storm. Denise listened tensely as they discussed how the town seemed divided over the diner and whether the prejudice she faced was truly as severe as rumored. "I heard there were fights here," one woman remarked, adjusting her wool scarf. Denise, while serving coffee, maintained her composure. "Yes, unfortunately some people don't take kindly to outsiders, but we're working to resolve it peacefully." Before she could elaborate, the door opened again, this time revealing Ethan. He paused, taking in the strangers in the diner, but entered anyway, giving Denise a questioning look as if to ask if everything was okay. She gave a small nod, signaling that it was under control. He approached the counter and whispered, "Looks like things are more stirred up than ever. I got a few messages from biker friends asking how they could help, but I'm worried about what Ray might do." "I'm worried too," Denise replied, gripping her apron tightly. "And it's not just Ray. I heard he's pressuring the town council to shut the diner down over structural issues that don't exist." Ethan sighed. "Are you sure there's nothing here that actually needs urgent fixing?" Denise hesitated. "The building's old, but not bad enough to be condemned. It's just abuse of power." As if on cue, the bell above the door jingled again, and a city official stepped in, lips pressed tightly against the cold, holding a clipboard. Shaking snow off his shoulders, he greeted Denise with a tense expression. "Good morning. I need to speak with you. We've received a report about electrical and heating issues at this establishment. An inspection is mandatory, and it needs to happen soon." Denise felt a shiver run down her spine. She could almost guess who was behind this report. But before she could protest, the official continued, "I understand this might be an inconvenient time, but we'll need to check everything. If there's any safety risk, the city may require a temporary closure. It's protocol." The small group inside the diner listened intently, hanging on every word of the conversation. Denise wanted to argue that the diner had been operating for years without major incidents, but the official maintained his neutral tone. She asked him to come back at another time when she could prepare, and he gave her 1 day to arrange things. Without lingering, he left as quickly as he'd arrived, leaving an oppressive tension in his wake. "Is this the shutdown you were worried about?" Ethan murmured. "Looks like it. They'll probably inspect everything tomorrow or the day after. If they find even a minor issue, they'll try to shut me down," Denise said, exhaling deeply. "I can't let that happen." The visitors finished their coffee, paid, and wished her luck before stepping back into the cold. The diner fell silent again. Ethan leaned on the counter, deep in thought. "Maybe I can check a few things before the inspection," he said. "I've fixed heaters and lighting systems at gas stations and diners across the country during my travels. I'm not a pro, but I've handled a lot of repairs." Denise looked at him, relieved. "Any help would be great. I'll see if Beth knows someone reliable who can inspect the wiring." Their conversation was interrupted by a heavy thud on the roof, as if snow had piled up too high. Moments later, the lights flickered, dimming briefly. The sight was enough to alarm Denise and Ethan. In the heart of a harsh winter, losing heat could be disastrous for both customers and the food storage. Later that evening, they worked together to fix the diner's heater, which had been showing signs of wear for weeks. While Ethan removed metal panels to check the pipes, Denise held a flashlight and handed him tools as he asked for them. They worked with a sense of urgency, knowing each passing hour brought them closer to the inspection. "Careful with that wire," Denise warned, spotting a loose cable that could cause a shock. Ethan nodded, continuing cautiously. Slowly but surely, warm air began circulating again, albeit faintly. It was past 11 by the time they stabilized the temperature inside, though neither was sure it would withstand a thorough inspection. "I think it'll hold," Ethan said, putting the tools away. "If it breaks again during the inspection." Denise trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Outside, the wind howled fiercely, swirling snow into thick drifts that almost blocked the street. Denise worried that if the storm worsened, even emergency services might struggle to reach them. That night, Ray made a point of walking past the diner, stopping briefly to observe from a distance. Without saying a word, he continued on, leaving only a trail of footprints in the snow. The look on his face said it all, and Denise couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By midnight, the diner was empty, the only sounds being the wind outside and the faint hum of the electrical lights. Denise had locked the door but couldn't bring herself to turn off all the lights as usual, leaving a lamp on to keep the darkness at bay. Ethan offered to stay the night in a small side room, ready to step in if anything happened. An hour later, as they sat near the kitchen, Beth arrived, breathless, with updates from her connections. The town council was under direct pressure from Ray and others, and it seemed likely they'd move forward with shutting down the diner. They'd need to find a legal loophole or ensure the building was in perfect condition. "Tomorrow, I'll check the diner's construction records," Beth said firmly. "There might be old documents proving the structure is sound and recently updated." "Thank you, Beth. Any evidence could help stop this." Denise touched her shoulder. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Ethan, seated at the counter, flipped through an old map and notes left behind, trying to distract himself. He still hoped the video's attention would prompt the town to confront Ray's prejudice. But the hatred felt as relentless as the snowstorm outside. For half an hour, they sat in silence, each lost in thought. The soft glow of a small fireplace offered a faint warmth, while the rest of the diner was dark except for the yellowish light of the lamp. Denise recalled her mother's words. "Cold days don't last forever." It was a thin comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. Then, in the dead of night, a loud knock at the front door shattered the calm. A voice shouted from outside, "Denise, open up! We need to talk! Now!" Denise jumped at the loud knock on the door, followed by an insistent shout demanding she open it immediately. Still shaken, she glanced at Ethan and Beth, who exchanged a brief look of alertness, ready for whatever might unfold. Crossing the dimly lit diner, illuminated only by the lamp above the counter, Denise felt a lump forming in her throat. She wasn't sure if she would find Ray and his gang outside or someone from the town hall, but the possibility of trouble grew with each passing second. As she cracked the door open, she saw a man in a dark hat shivering from the cold, flanked by two others huddled under heavy coats. Snowflakes fell relentlessly, almost forming a white curtain that made it hard to see anyone further back. The man held a folder stuffed with papers and wore the tense expression of someone burdened with unpleasant news. "Sorry for arriving at this hour," he said, raising the folder as if it were a credential. "I'm a messenger from the town hall, and I need to inform you that an inspection will take place tomorrow morning. They've requested urgency, citing serious complaints about your establishment's structure." Denise took a deep breath, feeling a pang of indignation. This wasn't the time to argue. She needed to stay calm. Reacting emotionally wouldn't help. She stepped aside to let the trio enter, relieved they weren't Ray's henchmen but still troubled by the nature of their visit. "I understand there's an inspection scheduled, but why so early?" She scanned their tired faces. "My diner has been operating without any apparent issues." The man in the hat shuffled through the papers, clearing his throat before responding, "My job is simply to deliver this notice. If everything's in order, there's no reason for a shutdown. But from what I've been told, the list of alleged issues includes electrical wiring, heating systems, and even the structural integrity of the walls. I'm sorry, but I must warn you that the process for closure could be immediate if requirements aren't met." Denise felt a stab of anxiety, though she'd half expected something like this. She thanked them for coming, refrained from pressing for details, and saw them out, eager to regroup with Beth and Ethan. Before leaving, the messenger added, "It's early, but I've been informed that the inspection will begin around 9 in the morning. I suggest preparing any documentation that proves the building's stability. If there are deficiencies, address as many as you can now. Good luck." As soon as the door closed, Denise exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Silence filled the diner, broken only by the faint crackling of a small fireplace in the back. Beth approached, holding her phone, and showed Denise a series of messages from outsiders confirming they'd seen videos of the assaults and vandalism. Among the updates was confirmation that groups of motorcyclists and truck drivers were organizing to head her way, bringing supplies and potential donations to help cover her overdue bills. "So the caravan is really coming?" Denise asked, her voice tense. Beth nodded. "From what I've heard, some groups are leaving tomorrow. Others need more time to cross the state, but they all want to arrive before New Year's. They want to make the diner a rallying point." Ethan stood by the windows, watching the unrelenting snowfall illuminate the deserted street. He turned to face Denise. "This could be great for you, but what if Ray and his crew retaliate? Or if the inspection leads to your diner being shut down before the caravan gets here?" Denise bit her lower lip, tense. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of. I don't think I can take another blow. If they shut the diner down, I won't be able to welcome the people coming to help. And if Ray sees a large group arriving, he might try something drastic." Sensing her friend's distress, Beth placed a reassuring hand on Denise's arm. "Let's take a breath. I can dig through old papers, records of minor repairs, maybe even documents from the previous owner. We might find proof that the structure was inspected at some point. I'll also call a friend who's a technician to come and check whatever he can before the official inspection." Denise nodded, discreetly wiping her eyes with her sleeve. It was past 1 in the morning, and the anxiety was making her head throb. But there was no time to rest. She had only a few hours until the inspection. With Ethan's help, she spent the rest of the night checking every corner of the diner. He tightened loose metal panels, inspected exposed wires, and tried to improve the heater temporarily. Beth scoured her contacts for someone who could provide a quick report. Meanwhile, Denise swallowed her urge to cry, recalling her mother's words about perseverance conquering any storm. By dawn, a brief exchange of messages confirmed that a technician would arrive shortly to examine the premises. Denise, her eyes heavy with fatigue, sent Beth home to rest for at least an hour, and Ethan retired to the small side room. Left alone, Denise couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of Ray's threats, the caravan, and the looming inspection. The day's first surprise came in the form of a phone call. The calm yet direct voice on the other end introduced herself as a representative of a local newspaper, requesting a last-minute interview to cover the Denise's diner story before the authorities arrived. Denise considered declining, wary of further exposure, but eventually agreed. Perhaps showcasing her reality to the public could pressure officials to act fairly. By 8:30, a young reporter and her cameraman arrived, their cheeks reddened from the cold. Denise greeted them with the best smile she could muster. As she served them coffee, the reporter took photos with her phone and jotted notes about the diner's history, how Denise had taken over, and the recent acts of aggression she'd endured. The conversation was brief, but allowed Denise to highlight the diner's role as a welcoming space for locals and travelers alike. She shared its familial legacy and quoted her mother's favorite saying, "Food is love made visible." The reporter seemed genuinely curious about how a black woman had managed to own a place many believed should remain in the hands of local families for generations. Denise felt a small sense of pride as she recounted how she'd saved every penny, defying naysayers to achieve her dream. Near the end of the interview, the technician Beth had called arrived. As he began inspecting the electrical system, the reporter continued filming parts of the diner. Denise excused herself to accompany the technician to the back and listen to his assessment. His serious demeanor didn't mask the relief in his words. While there were maintenance issues to address, he found no immediate hazards warranting closure. He offered to provide a report affirming the diner's safety if needed. Just when things seemed somewhat under control, the official inspection team arrived. 2 inspectors, their faces neutral and eyes scrutinizing, examined every outlet, heater, gas pipe, and section of the building's structure. Denise stood with her hands clasped, sweating nervously but answering every question calmly. The technician also contributed his findings, occasionally discussing his observations with the inspectors. They exchanged glances, made notes, and continued their evaluation. After nearly an hour, the inspectors gathered their clipboards and asked to speak with Denise at a corner table. Beth and Ethan joined her for support, unsure if they'd be allowed to stay. The inspectors didn't object, seemingly indifferent. "We still need to review some details in the documentation," one inspector announced in a formal tone. "But based on our findings, there's nothing severe enough to justify immediate closure. We found only minor issues that must be addressed." Denise felt a surge of hope. However, the second inspector added, "That doesn't mean you're off the hook. The town hall is setting a deadline for repairs, and further complaints could prompt another inspection soon. Be prepared." It wasn't ideal, but at least the diner wouldn't be shut down immediately. Denise nodded, offering a restrained smile, determined to fix whatever was necessary. The inspectors wrapped up their visit and left, leaving behind a wave of relief. The reporter, still present, captured the reactions of Denise, Ethan, and Beth before bidding farewell, promising to publish her story by day's end to highlight the diner's struggles and the community's support. Once the news team departed, Denise allowed herself to breathe. She wanted to sit and cry with relief, but knew there was no time for that. She needed to prepare for the days ahead, especially for the arrival of the caravan, which could bring much-needed financial salvation. "They're definitely coming," Beth said, checking her phone, which was buzzing with more confirmations of the caravan's progress. "People from all over want to stop here. They're coming to support the cause, buy meals, and help pay off bills. This could save your diner, Denise." Denise's eyes widened as she processed the news. Soon, an influx of outsiders would flood the town. It was both thrilling and risky. What if Ray reacted violently? He stood to lose control over the local narrative when faced with a large group's arrival. Memories of his threats echoed in her mind. "I could shut the diner down to avoid trouble, but that doesn't feel right," she murmured, deep in thought. "It would be like giving up. I know we're at risk, but I'm tired of living in fear." Ethan, leaning against the counter, glanced at the clock. It was nearly 3 in the afternoon. Time was moving quickly, and it seemed the caravan would arrive in a day or two. He looked at Denise, his face reflecting the same mix of optimism and apprehension she felt. "If you want to keep going, we'll stand by you," Beth said firmly. "But promise me you won't face people like Ray alone." Swallowing hard, Denise nodded. She needed allies like Beth and Ethan, voices of support to counter the constant challenges. She glanced at the meager cash in the register, knowing every cent of the donations would be crucial to prevent utility shutoffs and other disruptions. The road ahead would be tough, but at least there was a glimmer of hope. At that moment, a car crept slowly past the diner. Through the windows, Denise spotted its wheels trudging through the heavy snow and briefly recognized Ray's rigid silhouette behind the wheel. He drove on but cast a chilling glance through the rearview mirror. Denise felt a shiver run down her spine as if reminding her that peace wouldn't come easily. "I'm not closing," she declared, her voice steadier than she expected. "Things might not get easier from here, but I'm done retreating. It's time to face whatever comes." Beth and Ethan nodded, their determination mirroring hers. There was still so much to do: chairs to arrange, windows to clean, and countless tasks to prepare for the caravan. The diner, though simple and battered by hardships, was becoming a sanctuary amid a harsh winter, both in climate and human relations. Together they set to work, strengthening the place as best they could. As the day drew to a close and the warm hues of twilight bathed the empty diner, Denise paused beside Ethan. She gently grasped his arm, silently thanking him for his unwavering support. He returned the gesture with a light squeeze of her hand, saying nothing. In that quiet exchange, they both pondered the same question. Would the caravan find the diner still standing when it arrived? Denise lifted her gaze to Ethan, and the two shared a moment of uncertainty. The caravan was coming, but would they find the diner still intact? Night fell over the city like a blanket of silence. Inside Denise's diner, the atmosphere was one of apprehension, though tinged with a glimmer of hope. Following recent announcements that the caravan of bikers and truckers would soon arrive, Denise and Ethan threw themselves into preparations, cleaning the dining area and replacing equipment on the brink of failure. Beth dashed back and forth, organizing drawers, checking inventory, and arranging everything for easier access, trying to create some semblance of order amid the chaos of the tiny kitchen. Around 10 o'clock, fatigue overwhelmed the trio, and they decided it would be best to close up for the night and get some rest, knowing the coming days would be demanding. Snow continued to fall hypnotically outside, illuminated by the streetlights on the deserted road. Denise climbed to the small upstairs room where she sometimes stayed to avoid the bitter cold on her way home. Ethan settled into a side storage room among boxes and kitchen supplies, keeping an ear out for any sounds of trouble. Beth opted to stay awake a little longer, checking messages and responding on social media. As the night wore on, the clock crept toward 2 a.m. when a loud crack echoed near the windows facing the street. Beth, still awake at the counter, froze mid-typing on her phone, her ears straining to catch the sound again. It repeated, like someone was testing the glass. She stood up, her fingers searching the wall for the main switch, flipping on a few lights while trying not to draw too much attention. "Ethan?" she whispered toward the storage room where he was resting. "I think there's someone outside." Ethan emerged, his hair disheveled and his eyes sharp. "It could just be the wind, but I'll check." Approaching the front door, Ethan peered through a narrow gap. Nothing. No movement except for the relentless fall of white flakes. But he noticed the main lock wiggling slightly, as if it had been tampered with. A chill ran through him, and he asked Beth to wake Denise in the kitchen. As Beth hurried off, Ethan took a deep breath, preparing for the worst. Seconds later, the silence shattered with the sound of breaking glass. The side window leading to the parking lot exploded inward with a loud crash. Shards flew into the diner as freezing air rushed in like a knife. Ethan sprinted toward the noise only to find two hooded figures climbing through the jagged opening. Before he could react, one of them shoved him violently against a table. Beth screamed for Denise, who stumbled down the stairs, her face pale with fear. Instinctively, she reached for her phone to call the police, but another intruder appeared in the kitchen, having broken in through the back door. Denise's heart raced and her trembling fingers struggled to dial the emergency number. Amid the panic, she managed to complete the call, shouting for help loud enough for the intruders to hear. Her cry seemed to provoke them further. One of the men lunged at her, snatching the phone from her hand and smashing it against the wall. Beth was shoved aside, stumbling over fallen chairs. Ethan, despite his injuries, tried to stand his ground, but he was outnumbered and overwhelmed. "You're not going to ruin everything here?" Denise shouted, desperately searching for a way to stop them. But her resistance was futile. One of the intruders spun around and swung a metal bar into the display case, shattering the glass and scattering pies and shards across the floor. Another vandalized the shelves, knocking over bags of flour, cans of preserves, and every supply they could reach. The frenzy of destruction spread to every corner of the diner. Ethan, now sporting a gash above his eyebrow, struggled to his feet. Beth scrambled to clear objects from the floor, hoping none would be used as weapons. Denise stood frozen, unable to process the devastation unfolding around her, months of hard work, and the sentimental legacy of her late mother, reduced to chaos in mere minutes. The intruders weren't finished. They shoved Denise toward the counter, rifling through drawers in search of cash or valuables. One of them yanked the fire alarm lever on the wall, triggering an even greater disaster. The alarm blared deafeningly, and the ceiling sprinklers sprayed water everywhere. In an instant, the diner was a soaked wasteland of drenched equipment, soggy ingredients, and floating debris. "Stop, please!" Denise pleaded, unable to touch the attackers for fear of worsening the situation. Beth, drenched head to toe, helped Ethan wipe water from his face. The alarm echoed into the snowy night, creating a surreal nightmare. The invaders, realizing the alarm might attract the police, began to retreat. One of them, however, couldn't resist tipping over a shelf full of kitchen utensils, sending pots, pans, and steel tools clattering to the floor. The back door swung open, letting in a frigid gust that dimmed the remaining lights. As they fled, their voices carried threats. "You should have left when you had the chance. This place isn't for outsiders or people who don't know their place." Denise, trembling with fear and cold, reached for the light switch to avoid a short circuit. The alarm continued wailing, and the sprinklers turned the diner into a flood zone. Anxiety gripped her chest as she waded through the debris, surveying the destruction. Overturned chairs, shattered glass, the register submerged in water, and ruined inventory. The devastation wasn't just physical, it tore at the dreams she had clung to for so long. Beth leaned against the counter, gasping for breath, while Ethan rubbed his bruised shoulder, his face etched with pain. None of them could speak. The piercing siren filled their ears, drowning out coherent thought. Then, flashing red and blue lights reflected off the watery floor. The police had arrived, but too late to prevent the catastrophe. 2 officers rushed in, urging everyone to stay clear of exposed wires. They quickly assessed injuries and asked hurried questions about the attackers. How many? Which direction they went, if anyone had recognized them. Denise's weak voice struggled to answer, repeating that it had all happened too fast. All she could offer was a vague suspicion that Ray or someone connected to him might be involved, though she hadn't seen their faces. As Beth recounted what she could remember, Denise surveyed the scene. The sight of shattered glass, drowned furniture, and a ruined stockroom broke her heart. Tears welled up as the full weight of the loss hit her, her mother's legacy and her own hard work, destroyed beyond repair. Ethan, still groggy, placed a hand on Denise's shoulder but couldn't find comforting words. The silence that followed the fire alarm's cessation was even worse, laying bare the totality of the damage. Beth opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Denise dropped to her knees, letting the water seep through her fingers, her gaze empty. The chill in the diner mirrored the icy despair settling into their souls. In a voice barely above a whisper, Denise finally said, "I can't go on. This is the end." The wailing police sirens grew louder outside, but any remaining hope seemed to have vanished. The night passed slowly and heavily, as if each minute insistently prodded the open wound in Denise's heart. After the attack that nearly destroyed Denise's diner completely, she sat on one of the still intact stools, looking around and taking in the scene of devastation illuminated by the first rays of sunlight. The place, once filled with so many happy memories, now bore deep scars of vandalism and the fire alarm that had drenched everything. Shards of glass and puddles of water littered the floor, equipment lay overturned, ingredients ruined. To a passerby, it might seem as though life or hope could never return here. Even as the day broke, the brightness brought little comfort. A cold wind blew through the back entrance where the door remained damaged. Snow accumulated on the thresholds, mixing with the water dripping from the ceiling, painting an oddly melancholic picture. Denise's hands trembled, her breath shallow as she recalled every moment of the attack. The threats, the fear, and above all the suffocating sense of powerlessness still weighed on her chest. Beth, stirring from a forced nap in a corner of the dining area, rose with a weary sigh. Her disheveled hair and deep under-eye circles made it clear she'd been up all night. She approached Denise hesitantly, unsure how to start a conversation. She stared at the wreckage, searching for a thread of hope. "We need to clean this up before it gets worse," she ventured, her voice tired. "If the water pools any longer, the damage will spread." Denise nodded but didn't move immediately. She needed a moment to process it all, to summon the strength to act. Then came the sound of an engine outside. A convoy of police cars and a few volunteers who had learned of the attack through social media began to arrive. Within minutes, they parked beside the diner and stepped out, their faces filled with solidarity. Among the volunteers was a group of young people armed with squeegees, cloths, and boxes of cleaning supplies. Their expressions were serious, reflecting an understanding of the gravity of the situation. The lead officer, a man with a graying goatee, approached Denise and handed her a report saying, "We've brought some people who offered to help. Hopefully this time we can gather more evidence to incriminate whoever did this. I'm sorry for what you've gone through." Denise forced a brief smile and nodded in gratitude. At least now the police seemed more determined to act than they had in the past. Perhaps the social media uproar had compelled them to take the case more seriously. Moments later, Ethan appeared, limping slightly, a simple bandage covering a cut above his brow. Though groggy from the ordeal, he felt a flicker of hope seeing people willing to lend a hand. He approached Denise, gently touching her shoulder. "Can you stand? If not, let me handle this." She took a deep breath, blinking back the tears that stubbornly threatened to fall. Slowly she stood, resting her arm on his shoulder for a moment to steady herself emotionally. Then she let go, joining the volunteers who had already begun gathering shards of glass and stacking broken chairs. Little by little, the chaotic scene began to resemble a community effort. One of the younger men turned on a small portable radio, hoping to lighten the atmosphere. The soft music, though muffled by the sounds of dripping water and squeegees scraping the floor, provided a semblance of companionship. As they worked, conversations sparked, and they discovered that some volunteers had traveled from other parts of the state, outraged by the news that a diner had become the target of such hostility. Beth, darting around, coordinated the arriving helpers. She sorted salvageable dishes, organized soaked utensils into boxes for later cleaning, and discarded everything beyond repair. Each item sent to the trash made Denise's heart ache, reminding her of the diner's former life, filled with customers, laughter, and the aromas of homemade food. Local residents, typically reserved or even absent, began showing up, some out of curiosity, others with quiet remorse. An elderly woman approached Denise with tearful eyes, offering homemade cookies. "I know it won't fix anything, but I hope it gives you a bit of energy," she said, almost apologetically, as though making up for years of distant indifference. Denise accepted them, her gratitude for the small gesture unmistakable. As the day wore on, the sheer amount of debris cleared away revealed the extent of the damage. Worse still, part of the electrical wiring had been compromised by the fire alarm's water, the heater was beyond repair, and several kitchen appliances were ruined. The cost of replacing everything would be staggering, and Denise had no idea where to find the resources. Yet the presence of so many willing to help kept her from sinking back into the despair of the previous night. One tall man wearing a leather biker jacket approached Denise, introducing himself as a friend of one of the arriving groups. He handed her an envelope containing donations collected from his peers during their journey. While not a huge sum, the generosity of strangers left her speechless. "We want to see this place up and running by the time the others arrive," he said with an encouraging smile. "You're not facing this alone." Denise clutched the envelope to her chest, fighting back tears of gratitude. Meanwhile, Beth cleared space for more arrivals, including a group of truck drivers from nearby highways who had answered the call for help online. They brought bags of cement, tools, and strong arms to haul broken furniture and damaged equipment. The city's mayor also made an appearance, though visibly embarrassed for having done so little earlier. Likely pressured by the public outcry, she arrived with 2 aides, announcing that to avoid a PR disaster, the city would expedite the renewal of licenses and permits needed to rebuild the diner. It wasn't a grand gesture, but coupled with the increased police vigilance, it made the outlook slightly less grim. Ethan, coordinating repairs to some critical structural areas, saw Denise checking updates on Beth's phone. Messages of support poured in, along with shared videos showing the diner's state before and after the attack. Comments expressing outrage at Ray and his group underscored the mobilization sparked online. The virtual outcry had transformed into tangible action, turning the ruins into a kind of solidarity camp. "Maybe this is the beginning of change," Beth said, gently gripping Denise's arm. "When people see injustice, it can move them to act." With a faint smile, Denise recalled her mother's words. A recipe only works with the right ingredients. Perhaps this was the moment when friendship, empathy, and courage came together to save Denise's diner. Yet the fight was far from over. There was still so much to repair, overdue bills to pay, and above all, the looming threat of Ray, who surely wouldn't stand idly by while support for the diner grew. As evening approached, the soaked walls dried, the floors were cleaned, glass shards were removed, and bags of debris piled outside, ready for disposal. Donations of money and materials were meticulously organized by Beth, who kept a detailed ledger. Despite his injured shoulder, Ethan climbed ladders to replace damaged ventilation ducts. The greasy scent lingering in the kitchen gradually gave way to the freshness of new paint and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee, an unthinkable transformation from the despair of dawn. As the sun set, casting an orange glow through the freshly cleaned windows, exhaustion set in for everyone. Yet it was a satisfying weariness as they witnessed the diner's revival. Though much remained to be done, the heart of the diner endured. After all, the dining area, now filled with compassionate volunteers, proved that the spirit of the holidays and human kindness could shine even in the harshest winters. Around 8 in the evening, the stream of volunteers slowed as many returned home or resumed their travels. Some promised to return the next day. Denise was left with Beth, Ethan, and a handful of travelers finishing the harder-to-reach corners. The city had withdrawn its threats of closure, but another inspection could come at any time. Even so, for the first time since the attack, Denise felt that fear no longer ruled her. A tangible support network surrounded her, proving she was not alone. And in this spirit of collective strength, she approached the old clock on the wall, a piece she rarely noticed. It now read nearly midnight on December 30th, an uncommon hour for any commotion in the town. Taking a deep breath, her eyes swept over the reorganized details, the reassembled chairs, the partially restored counter, and the voices of people chatting in subdued celebration. Time was short, the new year just hours away. The morning of December 31st dawned with a timid brightness, still blanketed by fresh snow, but illuminating a scene that had become a symbol of perseverance. Denise's diner, which just days before lay in ruins and rubble, now thrived amidst the sounds of hammers, tired laughter, and the aroma of simple food. Throughout the night, bikers and truckers arrived in pairs or small groups, bringing supplies and building materials. Some came from nearby, others from considerable distances, all with the same purpose: to help in any way they could. Denise woke after just a few hours of sleep, stretching on one of the benches in the dining area. As she opened her eyes, she saw a cheerful bustle of people serving coffee and pastries. A group of young men arranged paints and brushes on an improvised table, ready to touch up what the last renovations hadn't covered. Sunlight streamed through the windows, reflecting off the freshly cleaned floors. She couldn't help but smile, realizing the big day had arrived. In just a few hours, the new year would replace old sorrows. And if all went well, this would mark a definitive new beginning for the diner and for all the stories intertwined within its walls. Beth, excited and wearing a wool hat, approached Denise, holding her phone and showing her videos recorded throughout the night. She displayed scenes of truckers unloading boxes of food, a biker trying to fix an electric kettle, and groups organizing themselves to paint walls and repair part of the roof. The post already had thousands of views and supportive comments pouring in from all over. Overwhelmed, Denise hugged her friend. "It's amazing to see so many people coming together, especially knowing we couldn't have done this on our own." Beth smiled. "It seems like what's happened here has become a symbol. Everyone is inspired by your courage to keep the doors open, despite everything." As they talked, Ethan passed by, carrying 2 wooden planks meant for patching one of the still damaged windows. He paused when he noticed Denise, sharing a rare moment of calm. With a nod, he greeted her. She returned it with a smile, and they exchanged a brief look of mutual understanding. They both remembered how, just weeks ago, they were strangers. Now it felt like their paths were linked in a way no one could have predicted. Throughout the morning, bikers from various groups arrived in convoys. Some brought small cash donations, others offered physical help, and some just wanted to sit down and celebrate the diner's return. The steady flow of people in and out of the snow-covered street caught the attention of a few locals, who began to approach cautiously, curious to understand what drove so many outsiders to support Denise. Some eventually offered to help, while others simply watched from a distance. The atmosphere became increasingly vibrant and colorful. By midday, the aroma of food filled the dining area as Denise decided to test the stove, which a trucker specializing in industrial kitchen repairs had recently fixed. It still lacked a few parts, but the essentials were working. She made a pot of vegetable soup from donated produce and baked some apple pies, remembering the recipe that had once sweetened the lives of loyal customers, and the first time she had served Ethan. The scent spread, drawing hungry gazes and delighted smiles. The improvised meal was enough to warm the hearts of the volunteers who worked tirelessly. Ethan, catching the sweet aroma, approached the counter where the pies were cooling. "Need help serving?" Denise gently shook her head but smiled. "You've done enough. I'll take some slices to those outside clearing the sidewalk." He watched her go, feeling a quiet comfort in how much those pies symbolized the diner's resilience. In the afternoon, Beth informed Denise that the mayor planned to visit, keen to show solidarity now that the local media, intrigued by the buzz, would also be present. Denise sighed, feeling torn between her impatience with political maneuvering and the recognition that any official support would be helpful for safety assurances. The mayor arrived shortly after, delivering a brief speech about community unity, respect for differences, and a promise that what happened would not be tolerated again. Denise nodded politely, refraining from lengthy comments. She held no grudges. She simply wanted to move forward. As night fell, the true festive atmosphere began to take shape. Volunteers had completed most of the repairs. The diner's sign, though simple, now displayed the name Denise's Diner, with a freshly painted subtitle, "Food is Visible Love," a phrase Denise's mother always said. Improvised lights were strung along the facade, twinkling like fireflies in a winter garden. Inside, chairs multiplied, some donated, others restored. The snow reflected the colorful glow of the lights, creating an almost magical impression. It was the last day of the year, and despite all the scars, Denise wanted to honor the tradition of serving something special. Using ingredients brought by the truckers, she prepared large pots of chili, rice, and other warm dishes. Her impromptu helpers sliced bread and served meals to anyone who arrived, free of charge. The idea was to celebrate the solidarity that had saved the diner. Gradually, the dining area, which had recently been empty, filled with people, some familiar, many strangers. The chatter grew into an excited hum. At one point, Denise tried to move through the tables to ensure everyone was served, but she was stopped at every step by people who wanted to shake her hand, praise her courage, or wish her a happy new year. Her eyes welled up repeatedly, overwhelmed by what she saw. Among the crowd were locals who had once been indifferent or even opposed to her presence. Now, moved by the outpouring of support, they approached, offering apologies for past ignorance and small gestures of reconciliation. Denise greeted each apology with a genuine smile, as if witnessing seeds of change taking root. Ethan, now without the bandage on his brow, managed the background music, using a small speaker someone had brought. He played soft tunes, turning the diner into a space where conversations easily drowned out any remnants of hate. Beth assisted in the kitchen, adjusting spices and refilling trays as they emptied. Every now and then, she exchanged joyous glances with Denise, as if silently saying, "We did it." In the back, an unexpected scene drew attention. A once vocal opponent, known for saying Denise didn't belong in this business, stood awkwardly holding a cup of hot tea. When he noticed Denise approaching, he cleared his throat nervously and spoke hesitantly. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I thought, well, it doesn't matter. You've shown that this place is for everyone, and I'd like to be a part of it, if that's okay." Denise felt her heart warm. "Of course it's okay. No one's asking you to leave. There's plenty of room for us to grow together." He let out a nervous laugh, grateful for her understanding. Finally, he raised his cup in a shy toast, and she responded in kind with her own coffee mug. It was a small gesture, but it marked the beginning of a more inclusive coexistence. As the clock neared 11:50 p.m., the anticipation for the new year filled the diner. Some brought sparkling wine, while others had bottles of juice or soda for a collective toast. The music grew louder, and Denise, smiling, stepped onto a small improvised platform, calling for everyone's attention. The chatter quieted as she took a deep breath and began, "I'm not sure how to thank each of you. If someone had told me a few days ago that we'd turn destruction into unity, I wouldn't have believed it. But here we are, proving that solidarity speaks louder. My greatest wish for all of us is to stay together because it's so much harder to fight hate alone. Thank you for showing me that there are good-hearted people everywhere." The applause that followed was so warm that Beth discreetly wiped away tears. Ethan, standing nearby, gave Denise a reserved smile as she stepped down to stand beside him. The entire room filled with joyous murmurs, countdowns, and emotional laughter. Someone announced there was less than a minute until midnight. Everyone gathered, forming a spontaneous circle with raised glasses and tight embraces. Denise felt lighter than she had in years. The guilt, fear, and tension seemed to dissolve into the frosty air, replaced by renewed hope. As the countdown began, 10, 9, 8, she exchanged glances with Beth, Ethan, and many others who had helped save the diner. When the chorus reached 0, a resounding "Happy New Year" echoed down the street, accompanied by cheers and gestures of celebration. Ethan, saying nothing, simply pulled Denise into a hug, letting the moment speak for itself. She felt the warmth of his embrace and closed her eyes, recalling every challenge, every threat, every sleepless night. At that moment, it was clear they had overcome far more than a simple renovation. They had broken through barriers of prejudice, isolation, and disbelief, and while there were still battles to face, the certainty of support was unshakable. A few impromptu fireworks lit up the snowy sky, casting colorful reflections on the white ground. The celebration continued with cheers, toasts, music, and hugs. On every face was a mix of relief and joy. At last, Denise saw the future arriving. Her diner was standing again, not just in structure but in its meaning as a symbol of resilience and love. As Denise and Ethan embraced, the new year arrived, bringing the certainty that with love and unity, no winter is strong enough to freeze hope. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.